Alright, this is our 2014 Acura MDX. It's been a really good vehicle other than the brakes have been horrible. And we took it back to the dealer when it only had 10,000 miles on it because it had such bad brake pulse. And I was sure that it was covered by a warranty, but it wasn't. So they reluctantly, that dealership we took it to, reluctantly turned the rotors for us and smoothed it out, and it was good for about 5,000 more miles and it started to shake again. And they of course insisted that it was our fault, the way we drive or whatever, but we've never had this problem on any other vehicle that we've ever had. And since Acura won't cover it, I just said, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna buy some new brake rotors and pads and do it myself, and we'll fix these brakes. So that's what we're gonna do. These are the EBC Ultimax 2 rotors and pads, so this is a kind of a match set from EBC that I'm hoping will solve this problem. Forgive the noise, it's my fan, sorry, it's hot. The kit that I ordered included the pads, obviously, for the front and rear, and rotors for the front and rear. You'll also want to get some brake cleaner. This is my favorite brake grease, this ceramic brake system grease. It's very good, ceramic fortified brake grease. It's got a high temperature rating, -50 to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's a pretty wonderful product. Definitely more expensive than the average brake grease, but you don't use a lot of it, so this will last me for a lot of different brake jobs on friends' vehicles too. And it's just a good product. I don't see why you would skimp on it. So enough blabbing, let's take that thing apart. The thing to do is to pop the hood. I do that so that we can keep an eye on our brake reservoir. We don't want that to overflow. And if it does start to get full, we'll turkey baste it out of there. This is just the factory jack position. Oh, I need to grease that. Now, you don't need this tool in order to do this job, but it makes it a lot more fun. We're all about the fun in my garage. Alright, so this is our front driver's side rotor. I wanted to show you the socket sizes. This is a 17mm on the slide up here. And we're going to remove those two bolts, and then this is a 19mm back here. And we're going to remove those two bolts afterwards to remove the bracket that holds on the brake rotor. Okay then, before I got started on this, I'm putting my impact gloves on. These have got knuckle protection on them because, man, I can't tell you how many times I've slipped and bashed my own knuckle. I won't waste your time watching me spin all the bolts. Alright, I've got those loosened up and removed. That's what they look like. Alright, before we go too much further, I'm going to clean this off. So this is just some crappy shop rags. Throwing them down underneath there because it tends to drip the brake dust stuff everywhere. And then I'm just hitting it with some of our brake cleaner. You want to be fairly liberal with that stuff. So I rock it side to side to compress the piston a little bit, and we'll do that for real with tools in a minute. Alright. Balance them on top of the rotor for now. This is just pad number 1 on the front here. We'll pull him out. Let's get him out of the way. Let's get the other pad out of the way. There we go. And you'll notice that the inside pad has the little brake squealer on it so that when your brakes get low, that will hit the rotor and it makes a horrible noise to remind you to replace your pads. And we're nowhere near that on these pads. They just suck. Now we're going to compress the piston. I like to use the old brake pad as the thing that I level it out with. I take that guy there, I stick the old brake pad in there. And I take my C-clamp, which needs to be adjusted quite a bit. You don't have to use a C-clamp, any clamp will do, anything that'll give you kind of some mechanical advantage as you're tightening it down. This is perfect for this. C-clamp is just what I've always used and is what I was taught to use, but it doesn't matter. But all you're doing is gradually giving it pressure. You don't have to torque it down super hard. You just give it a little bit of pressure and the brake system will let it push back in. That's just giving it a little bit of gradual pressure until those pistons recede. And then after we do this, we'll want to check our brake fluid reservoir to make sure it hasn't risen too much. So that's all the way in, so I'm going to release my C-clamp, which is barely on it. Not a ton of pressure, and then you can see that those pistons are pressed in. So you can see this fluid level actually did rise quite a bit. I don't know if you can see that very well, but it's up here in the neck. And that was just on the first one, so I'm actually going to take a little bit of fluid off of this. I wanted you to see, and this is a fresh pair of gloves. You don't want to put your dirty gloves inside of this. So there's a little filter in here. You got to take that out before you use your turkey baster, or in my situation, a syringe to pull this stuff out. So my fluid's getting pretty high there. I'm going to take this guy and just suck out a little bit of fluid just to try to get it back under control. I'm going to leave it in the syringe so that if we need to put it back in, after we've got the job done, we can do that. So that's what that looks like. Pull him out. Dripping a little bit. Turkey baster actually works a little better than this. I wanted to show you that I zip tied that up to that strut tower, and it's also balancing over here just to kind of take the weight off of it, so it's not putting any pressure on the brake line. And also I want you to know that I'm being conscious of this line. I don't want to twist it up. So what I've done is rotated it over to here, and then I'm going to have to move it back the same way that I moved it over to there. I wanted to show you how much leverage I needed to pop these bolts, so I ended up using my breaker bar and hooking it onto there and getting over to the front and basically lifting it up from the front in order to pop the bolt loose. Very tight. There it goes. You gotta be kidding me with that. Alright, now that those bolts are loose, I can finish them off with my hands. That's one of them. Set those aside somewhere smart. That's number 2. Now this bracket should come off with no trouble. We can clean that up and put it back on. Alright, the last thing to undo here is this screw that holds the rotor in place. And in my case it's really loose, probably because the brakes have been vibrating for so long. But in some cases it's really hard to get this bolt out. I've seen people have to drill them out and stuff, but I think I'm lucky because it's just unscrewing nice and easy. We're ready to pull our rotor off. Sometimes these seize onto the hub, but again, not a problem with this particular vehicle. There we go. Now we just got to clean up our new rotor and put it in place. Alright, this is my new rotor and the old one side by side. I just wanted to show you that the design is essentially identical to the factory rotor, other than these are black and beautiful and those are shit. Now before you put these on the vehicle, I like to clean them up really well because there can be a little residue on them from the factory. So I just take some of that same brake cleaner that we use to clean the rotors and spray it all over them and wipe it down, and then we put them on. Remember, you want to get both sides. This is a clean shop rag. Remember, these can only go one way, so you want to take and find on the rotor where that recessed screw head is and line it up with the hole that we took that screw out of. Like that. There we go. Take our screw and set him back in there. Hopefully this is the last time this has to be done for 100,000 miles on this car. And we've never had brake problems like this on other vehicles that we've owned, Hondas, Toyotas, Ford, you name it. I mean, I've never had a problem like this. There you go. We're ready to put our bracket back on after we clean that up too, because that's a filthy bugger. Alright, now that that guy's all cleaned up, ooh, it looks brand new, doesn't it? No, not really, but I don't care. But anyways, we're going to put a little bit of grease on these little slides that touch the edge of the brake pad. Just a touch, just a little touch of it. Not a lot. Smeared around in there on both ends. That little bitty bit of this grease goes a heck of a long way, so don't overdo it. And that's all I'm going to do before I put it on. Okay, so now we're going to put this guy back on. Now it's got a little bit of grease on each of those slides. The trick is to not hit your face on this. I just hit my face on it. Not much to see here, you're not missing much. You get the idea. You put the bolts in where you took them out. And then you tighten them just as mean as the person at the factory did, so that the next guy has to complain about how over tight everything was. Now you don't have to do this, but I just put a little dab of grease on these. Just a little dab. A little dabble. Not on the threads, just on the shaft. Little goes a long way again. Okay, so we want to make sure we use the same pad on the right side. So you'll see that this has got the little brake squealer on there, the little metal thing. And on the other pad, for the other side of the vehicle, it's on the other side. So you can see if we had it rotated the same way, that would be the, you want to just make sure you get it right. So before we put these on, we're going to put the shims on, and the factory from EBC was nice enough to include some new shims. If you don't want to use their shims, you can always use the old shims. Just clean them up before you put them back on. I'm putting a little bit of that brake grease in here. This is, just to help prevent any squeaking. So I just smear it around nice as even as I can. And not a lot. Don't want to overdo it. Then you take your shim and snap it into place. You can do that on all 4 pads. Just make sure you don't touch your greasy finger to the pad surface. You don't want to get the grease on the pad or on the rotor. Okay, so I like to start at the top. You're going to find this to be fidgety work on the inside. But start at the top and push it in most of the way, and then get the bottom in and clap it into place, and you're done. So this one, you kind of have to slide it behind the bracket bar before it'll slide in. You can see that's behind there. And now he just slides in nice. I'm going to cut my zip tie configuration here, which is just sad because it's artistic. Nobody likes to see art destroyed. And remember, I'm trying to keep that line from bending, so you don't want to rotate it over and twist this thing up. You want to keep it as smooth as possible. Okay, so now we're going to slide him back around, and I'll show you the inside, where we're going to put a little bit of brake system grease. So we put some on those guys here, and in here, just everywhere it touches the pad. And we can smear it around. And this is safe grease for the rubber on your brake system, so it's grease that's good for everything. Some greases, just be careful what you get, because some of them aren't safe for your rubber components. Okay, so we're going to put this back on, but we're going to slide it on so that we're only getting that bottom bolt in place. Sorry about my light. And yes, I realize I haven't put the springs in yet, but we'll do that after we get this bolt most of the way seated. So you see these little pins, they popped out when we took the old brake pads off. We got to put these guys back in, which is always a fun task. Everybody loves it. But what's going to happen is the pad, or the caliper rather, is going to hold the pads in place while these guys are springing them back out, which is tricky work. So I could do the top one, and I can show you. There's 2 little pinholes in the edge of each pad. We're just going to fish them in there. And we're going to leave that like that. So that's what we're going to do, but we're also going to do it on the lower end, which is the harder one to see. Have that top pin in, we're going to slide him back on, and we're going to put this pin in. And then we're going to remove the bottom pin that we put on before. You see that is on. I'm going to pull this guy off. Okay, so I'm going to remove that bottom bolt. Now we can slide him up like this, but not so far as that springs that other bolt. And that gives us access to put this pin in, which is going to be hard for you to see because of the angle of the camera. So with the bottom bolt out, we can slide it up like this, and then we can find those pinholes. Well, maybe. Can't see over there. There it is. Okay. So we're going to have to pinch that back together to get the caliper to slide back down, and now we can fish in that bottom bolt. And we'll be done on this side once we tighten it all down. But I think you get the idea. Don't forget to put those pins in, that's kind of critical. Because those pins are pulling the pads off of the rotors, which will extend the life of your pads and also reduce friction, increase your fuel mileage. You know, it's all about all the good things. I've rechecked the torque on all of my bolts. So that's essentially the front rotor and pad replacement on a 2014 Acura MDX. I'm going to do the other side. I won't bother filming that for you, but we'll get to the rear here, and that you will get to see. Alright, so now just the last step, obviously, put your tire back on. I say it's obvious, but maybe you didn't realize that. Maybe you thought you'd drive around with no tires. Oh, that's screwed up. Okay. Lug nut. Bolt. Or stud. We call those wheel studs in the business. It's business time. If you know what that is. Business time. Yep. So now we've got our lug nuts back on the wheel. I wanted to show you my tightening pattern because I'm anal, as always. So I've got the torque wrench set to 92 foot-pounds. I do it in a star pattern, so I go from this bolt to that bolt like you're drawing a star. I also heard some people say you don't have to do a star pattern, you have to think of it like that. You can think of it as skipping a screw, is what the guy said to me in a comment. So you're just jumping like one at a time. But I told him that at my age you never skip a screw, so I prefer the star pattern. There you go. And the point of this is to get it nice and even on the vehicle. And I'm doing my loose tighten with it in the air still, so there's no pressure from the ground making it so it won't sit tight. And then we'll lower it down and we'll get the full torque on it. Put it back down on the ground, we can torque these. There we go. Next, we're moving on to the rear. Same story, different day. Just breaking the lugs loose before I get it up in the air. Now we're going to remove this screw that's holding on the rotor. And I did have some trouble with some of them on the other side, so I wanted to let you know that I'm using the number 3 bit. This is the number 3 Phillips head. So, oh, and this one's loose. How funny. But the ones on the other side were super tight, so I could see how people could accidentally strip those out if they were using the wrong bit, but the number 3 is the way to go. So the rear is the same basic design as the front, only some of the bolts are smaller. We've got these 2 bolts that we're going to remove first. Those are 12 millimeters, and then back in here, holding in the bracket, are 17 millimeter bolts. So let's start by removing these 2 12 millimeters. And those are not super tight. Need the breaker bar to remove those, whereas those bracket ones, we're going to need the breaker bar to remove. Keep in mind these do also use pins, just like the front, the little spreaders, the springs you could call them, that are pulling the pads apart. You can see the 2 springs in there and how they're oriented. So when you're pulling this off, just be aware that they might go shooting off. So keep your hand in there and kind of pinch your calipers together, and it shouldn't happen to you. I'll keep the calipers pinched together and hopefully they don't spring loose on me. There we go. Get him out of the way. We can pull our pins out. Maybe. Under quite a bit of pressure. There we go. There we go, and then we can pull the pads out. And keep in mind, so this is the inside pad. It's got that little sensor that lets you know when you've reached the end of the pad's life. It's on the inside on the bottom. So we'll just make sure we put that on the new pad. Okay, now we're just going to compress this piston here and just to get this out of the way. Again, this doesn't take tons of pressure. Slow, even force is the best way to go. We've got a good angle on that. Just pushing the pin in all the way because the new pads are a little bit thicker. That's good enough for me. That light's angry. So we can set this out of the way, and again, keep in mind not to twist that table up. Alright, let's take those mean bolts off. So first one. Okay, now that we have them loose, I'm going to hit them with this tool. Alright, with the bracket off, I'm going to go clean it up, and then we can pull the rotor off. So we can go ahead and pull the rotor off. Now if you find that your rotor's not coming off easily, make sure that you've taken your parking brake off, by the way, because the parking brake is a drum brake inside of this rotor's housing, so just make sure that your parking brake is off. If it feels really stiff, it's more than likely that, but if it is rusted in place, you can always feed some bolts into these to break it loose, but do make sure your parking brake is off when you're working on the rear. So that means put some wheel chucks on too, and I'll show you those. And there's the drum brake assembly for the parking brake. And be sure to do a quick cleaning of your new rotors before you put them on. One other quick note, we want to transfer this rubber grommet over to our new rotor, and that's just a port that you can use to adjust the parking brake, which spins this little spider wheel. This is what that little rubber grommet looks like. It just goes in here. And that's what it looks like installed. Alright, when you're ready to install your new rotor, just make sure you've got that hole lined up with the threaded hole in the hub. Slide them over. There we go. I'm going to stick a little bit of grease on these, just like we did on the front. And again, not a lot, just a little bit goes a long way. For me, all I can fit in there is my pinky. And this just helps reduce that friction and allows those spreaders to do their job a little bit better. Now we're ready to put our bracket back on. This is our old pad with its brake sensor or pad sensor on in that direction, so we're going to install the pad sensor in the same direction on this new pad. And that's how that looks. I'll just snap it on. Oh, maybe. Maybe? There we go. So we're just making it look the same as the old one. Now we just need to put the shims on here. So just like the front, I put a little grease down on the back of the pad, and I smear that around with my fingertip to create a little layer of grease between the shim and the back of the pad. And with that grease smoothed out, now we can snap our shim on. And they just go like this. It's that easy. Slide them on, snap them over, install them on the bracket there. Maybe. There we go. And then same on the inside pad. Then we'll put in our... Okay, now we need to grease the piston and these little stops in the back of the caliper. So same idea. Smearing some grease around to get some grease between the piston and the shim, and the caliper and the shim. Okay, now we're ready to slide our caliper back down. Remember not to twist it. That cable, that brake hose, brake line. Just gonna seat one of these real gently here. And again, we got to put our pins in, those little spreaders. Okay, this is looking up from below, just because it'll give you a good angle on what I'm doing here. So what I have to do is put this guy into that little hole, this little pinhole on the bottom of the pad. So now with that spring in, we can put this bolt in, and then we can take the top one out. Then with the top bolt out, you can pull the caliper out a little bit. And then with the pin fished in, you can grab the end of it, slide it into that hole there. Okay. I'm just fishing those into their respective slots. Now he's in there all the way, and we can put that caliper back on and tighten down those bolts. So after you check the torque on all of your bolts, make sure that you've got those two guys in there, you're ready to put the wheel back on. And then back in the car, I depressed the brake pedal several times to get the fluid to go out to the calipers and fill the calipers back up and push those pistons into the brakes. And then after all this work is done, you got to do a good braking procedure. So go for a little ride, get up to 30 miles an hour and brake hard, and get back up to 30 and brake hard. Really heat them up well and seat those pads. And after you've done that first stage of the brake-in, go up to about 60 miles an hour and slow down to about 30, but don't come to a complete stop. Just kind of warm up the brakes and let them cool, and warm up the brakes again and let them cool. And after you've done that proper break-in procedure, you're just ready to drive it like a regular car, like it was, always before. I want to show you the brakes after the break-in period. The black color seems to have gone away. They just kind of look like normal brakes now, which is fine. Although I did think the black was cool. That's the rear one. If you can see that. It's not really giving you much view. Despacito, I like to eat the bean burrito.
I'm filming.
I know that you're filming. This isn't going well, so I'm going to have to do it again. Okay. Maybe if I could turn it. Put it on too tight. Okay, turn that off.